well. And the stop system, partly because it's evolutionarily a newer system, doesn't work nearly as well. And so what happens is the stop system more often than not loses the battle. It's affected by stress. It's affected by drugs and alcohol. It's affected by overuse. If you ever saw the movie Airplane, Lloyd, Lloyd Bridges plays that character where he's an old pilot trying to talk a guy down. And throughout the movie, he's suffering from stress. He goes back to all his bad habits, right? First, it's I picked the wrong week to stop smoking. And, then it's I picked the wrong week to stop drinking. And I think by the end, it's I picked the wrong week to stop sniffing glue. So, that's the impact of stress on that system. And so a big part of the problem with trying to change behavior is that we try to tell ourselves to stop doing things. And so what happens is we don't really reprogram that go system. Instead, we just try to rely on the stop system to stop us from doing what we don't want to do. And it eventually you lose the battle on that, and then you just give up.
So can you get into a little bit about how you measured some of that stuff? Like a little bit of detail on how you came about that?
Yeah. So, there's all kinds of studies, and some of them are my studies. Some of them are studies that came out of other labs. But there's all kinds of different things that people have done. So, for example, one of the things that we've done is to look at the influence of the go system on the way that it clears the deck for action. So, one of the things we did was to study cigarette smokers. So we were really popular on campus for a while because we were giving out coffee and cigarettes as part of our study. So what we would do is we would take smokers who were smoking at least 15 cigarettes a day, tell them not to have a cigarette for at least 30 minutes before coming to the lab. And then we would manipulate how much they needed to smoke. So one group, we would just send outside with a cigarette and a cup of coffee. And so they'd smoke their cigarette, drink the coffee, which would give the time for the nicotine to diffuse through the system. And then they'd come back up to the lab. The other group, we would sit them down in the lab and we'd give them a cup of coffee, which is really associated with smoking. So it would actually drive up their need to smoke. And then we'd tell them stories about how nice it would be to have a cigarette right about now. So that group was really pretty in need of a cigarette at that moment. And then we did a bunch of different tests on them, including things like having them tell us how much they liked a variety of products, including brands of cigarettes, products that had cigarette brands on them, as well as things that were completely unrelated to smoking. And what you find is that the more you need to smoke, the more you like cigarettes, the more you like things that are branded with cigarette brands, and the less you care about anything that has nothing to do with smoking. And the most dangerous piece of this is you actually care less about smoking-related illnesses like lung cancer if you really need a cigarette than if you don't.
Wow.
So your motivational system is really working hard to keep you doing the things that you've always done. And so the go system is incredibly efficient. And anyone who's ever been a smoker knows that, right? That you just get totally focused on having that next cigarette and nothing else seems to matter for that period of time. And if you haven't been a smoker, there's probably some other goal that you've had that's been so important to you that that's the only thing that you notice.
Yeah. So those people that went outside and had the smoke,
yeah.
they had less of an inclination for liking anything related to smoking, like that was already kind of out of their system.
Yeah. So those people, even though basically 10 minutes earlier, if we'd caught them before they'd had their cigarette, they would have thought cigarettes were incredibly attractive, that lung cancer wasn't that important. After they had their cigarette, they're less interested in brands of cigarettes, less interested in products with cigarette brands on it, less interested in things like lighters and ashtrays that they'd need to smoke with, and more interested in things unrelated to smoking, like DVD players or television sets. And they're more concerned about lung cancer right after they've had a cigarette than right before.
Wow.
Huh. Yeah.
So Darren, does that resonate with you at all since you're just quitting? Like Darren, what are you 5 weeks in now?
Yeah.
And you're still getting nicotine out of your electronic cigarette?
Yeah.
Your e-cig?
Yeah. And it works pretty good. I don't know. Like in this thing, I kind of like the battery died today, and I was kind of stressed out about it. So I was like intermittently charging it and smoking it. But like for an actual cigarette, I haven't really had too much of a craving. A couple times in the morning when like the sun's shining through the windshield and I got a fresh coffee, I'll like look to the dash for my cigarettes, but they're not there. So. Yeah. I finally threw out my ashtray yesterday.
That's good.
There you go. So there's a new kind of range anxiety. You know, they talk about range anxiety with those electric cars. You know, so now the range anxiety is the level of the battery on your e-cigarette.
Oh,
yeah, I would say so. I guess you could get a couple of them. It lasts about 12 hours, I think.
So that happens with people addicted to their cell phones, I guess, too?
I think I'd be less stressed out if this thing quit on me.
Then if you ran out of cigarettes?
Then if I ran out of cigarettes. Yeah. Like, I think it's helped in that capacity, but it's too soon to say, I guess, because I haven't really started to wean off of this thing, and I don't really have any plan to even yet, so... So maybe I'm cheating.
Well,
I don't know.
Cigarettes are a terrible delivery mechanism for nicotine. There's so much other stuff in them that getting something that's a little pure has got to be better for you.
So what about like keeping that in mind, nicotine?
So is that like a truce then would that be a truce between my go and my stop?
Well, you're still satisfying the go system, right? You know, so because the go system is really craving the nicotine.
So it's a go slower.
And also the action, right? So the e-cigarette is just it's a somewhat healthier option. Right. At some point, if you want to wean yourself off the nicotine, you're going to end up with another battle between the go system and the stop system, where the go system is going to start really whining.
So maybe I'm making it worse. I'm just making it like 3 little battles instead of just one big bout.
Well, it's at least now you'll be battling from a slightly healthier place.
What about addiction? And like speaking of nicotine, I mean, really, what I think cigarette smoking boils down to is a nicotine addiction too. I mean, how about that versus habits? Like, when does a habit just when it gets really bad become an addiction, or is addiction more about a definition of how a habit affects your life so negatively?
Well, I think that there's a strong habit component to addictions. There's no question about it. So, an awful lot of the mechanism that's driving, the cigarette, the use of cigarettes is the habit that's associated with it. Now, there's a couple of other things that are going on. There is a physiological addiction where your body's going to crave nicotine. That actually washes out pretty quickly overall. So, unlike heroin, not that I've done heroin, but the way you watch it on TV and the movies, right? That's a pretty grim thing to quit. Nicotine is actually the physiological addiction to nicotine is actually over pretty quickly. The big thing with nicotine is that one of the reasons it's such a powerful agent in the brain is that it binds to particular receptors, particular areas of these neurons in your brain, particularly in areas that control attention. And so that there are 2 things that happen. The first is by using cigarettes, you're actually really learning a lot about the situation in which you normally use them because your attentional mechanisms are on high alert because of the nicotine. And then the other thing that happens with cigarettes is that when you wean yourself off of cigarettes for a while, you feel really stupid because you can't pay attention anymore to anything. And that's real. Because your brain was supplementing the normal chemical it uses, which is a chemical called dopamine. It's supplementing that with nicotine. And when you stop using the nicotine, there isn't enough dopamine to take over. And so for a while, you actually have trouble paying attention. Wow. And you're kind of grouchy and stuff like that. So nicotine...
I have enough trouble paying attention.
So we're going to say nicotine. So nicotine that's one of the reasons why it's really hard.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons it makes it so hard to quit smoking. And I think it was, that they credit it to Mark Twain that he said that quitting smoking was one of the easiest things in the world to do, that he himself had done it hundreds of times.
Yeah. Yeah.
So before we get too farther into it, like what would be some advice then for me to or for someone in my situation to start breaking that habit for?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, I guess my habit is the habit of putting something in my mouth.
Yeah. Yeah. So, there's a few things to do. The first is, there's a real problem with starting the process by saying, I'm going to quit smoking. Because when you focus on, I'm going to quit smoking, what you're really doing is putting a huge burden on the stop system. Because what you're really saying is, whenever I was in a situation where I used to smoke, say sitting in the car with a cup of coffee and the sun shining in, now you're hoping that your stop system tells you, don't pull over and buy a pack of cigarettes, don't smoke. So one of the things you want to do is to really pay attention to all those kinds of situations that were really frequently associated with smoking. Things like sitting in the car or going out to hear a band or whatever it was, and figure out what are you going to do instead in those situations, because you're going to try to reprogram that go system with a new set of habits. So right now you're replacing the cigarette habit with an e-cigarette habit. And at some point, if you want to wean yourself off of that, you're going to actually try to create some other habit, which could involve putting something in your mouth, a stick of gum or something. But it might just be another behavior that when you used to smoke a cigarette, now you're going to do this other
I'm
thing.
going to twitch.
Yeah, that. I mean, you'd have to clear that with all your friends first, but that could work. I mean, one of the things I had years ago, I used to bite my nails when I was a kid, and up through graduate school. Not quite as unhealthy, maybe, as cigarette smoking, but probably got in the way of more dates. And I actually, in order to help myself stop biting my nails, I actually started playing with desk toys at work, because that just totally got in the way of biting my nails, because it's very hard to bite your nails when you're playing with a Slinky.
Was that conscious then?
I consciously decided to switch the behaviors. I mean, I actually had to spend about 2 weeks paying attention to when I was biting my nails, because I never knew when I was doing it. I realized I would sit at my desk as a grad student reading articles and biting my nails, which was highly unattractive to all my office mates, apparently. So then I made the conscious decision to go out and buy some desk toys. And every time I was tempted to bite my nails, I would just play with the Slinky. And now, my students, when they come to meet with me, they know the meeting hasn't really started till I pick up a desk toy and start playing with it.
That's a really bad habit of mine. I just stopped again. Like, I've been on and off biting my nails for years, but in the last few months, I've gone to get like manicures and everything. I won't even touch them now. I'm like, I'm going to let these grow and let somebody else take care of my hands. Cool. If I start picking at them, it's been a habit for decades. So I totally get that one.
Yeah, but the Slinky works wonders.
I'm a doodler. Maybe I could replace it with doodling.
Yeah.
But it's hard to doodle and drive.
Well, you can.
It is. Yeah, I don't recommend it.
Well, you text and drive pretty good, so you can probably doodle.
Allegedly. I've been experimenting with
voice
recognition, but it just makes a mess of everything. Yeah. I send it anyway, and hopefully people can decipher it.
Yeah. Well, you weren't spelling very well before anyway, so.
So I wonder if I maybe I'll just start like doing little tapping with my fingers or something when I start trying to get off this thing. I wonder if I could just, because it's got to be something I can do kind of all the time at a moment's notice.
Yeah. Buy a set of drumsticks. Start beating out rhythms on the dashboard.
Perfect.
So what else helps, Art? Like what else helps to put your brain in the mode for catching the stuff? Because it's
so right. So we got to get the goal right. We're going to be focused on positive goals. Another thing that's really important to do is to plan for all the things that are going to go wrong. So really think about all the situations where you used to smoke. So, for example, one of the big ones for smokers is social situations where you're hanging out with your other smoker friends, if they're going to light a cigarette sitting at home, what are you going to do? And you have to plan for that in advance, because it's dealing with temptations is a little bit like going to a party, and you go to a party and somebody makes a wisecrack at your expense, and so now everybody's laughing at you, and that's the moment where you really want to have the great comeback, and it just doesn't come to you. And so now what do? And what happens is you leave the party, and as you're walking out the door, you think of the thing you should have said. And